Hey guys, it's Archie. I'm back again for the ADHD Care Podcast, and I've got a special guest with me today. I've got Sophie Johnson. So Sophie's an accredited ADHD coach. She's based in Surrey, in Guildford, so local to our area. And I'm pleased to have Sophie as a guest today. So we are going to be discussing all things ADHD, and also talking about just finding out from Sophie about her journey in this kind of ADHD space. First of all, welcome, Sophie.
Hello.
Welcome. Finally, we managed to get this podcast off.
I know, it's been a while coming.
It has been. Do you want to come closer to your mic a little bit? I can't hear you. Okay, so...
Is that better?
Yeah, definitely much better. Okay. So we are streaming live. We haven't done this before, so you're kind of our guinea pig, Sophie, today.
Oh, I didn't know that.
We haven't streamed a podcast live before.
Okay, great.
So we are streaming live on... So we are on Instagram, and we are also live on YouTube. And I've been trying to get on Facebook as well, so we have some technical issues, so hopefully we'll be able to go live on there very soon. So as I said, today we are going to be discussing about all things ADHD, and hopefully you all had a good Easter break. We obviously took a few weeks off from this podcast and back raring to go. So first of all, Sophie, yourself, I know you've obviously been diagnosed with ADHD, and I wanted to find out more about you, about some of the struggles you've had living with ADHD pre-diagnosis, and also the other sort of professional side of you being an accredited ADHD coach. Mm-hmm. So I don't know where you want to start. I know you've been jotting down lots of notes there.
Scribbles.
Lots of scribbles. So if maybe we could start from the start, maybe let's go back to what brought you into this kind of sphere of ADHD.
Well, I was diagnosed with ADHD July 2019, so I was 49. And as with many late diagnosed adults, it stemmed directly from my children. So my kids are now 17 and 18, but at the time my daughter was having, various struggles in her teenage years, and we were, doing lots of research into lots of different areas, and we ended up going to see having some help from a local child psychologist. And through the conversations that we had with her, it became obvious that my daughter was probably going to, fit the criteria for having a diagnosis of ADHD. And I remember the morning very clearly when we left her room, and I think I'd kind of run out of her door to the car to rush somewhere else, and she sort of called after me, and I'd actually left my car keys behind, and I'd also left my coffee mug behind, which I take everywhere with me. And she sort of had this slight smile on her face, when she handed me my car keys and my coffee cup. And from there, I think that's when it became, alarm bell started ringing. So my daughter was diagnosed. I was diagnosed around the same sort of time.
Right. And so once you got the diagnosis, what support did you receive for yourself?
None.
Were you diagnosed privately or via the NHS? I
was diagnosed privately.
Right.
I didn't even, to be honest, I didn't try the NHS. I'm the sort of person that I would not have been able to wait.
Right.
It's when my focus is in an area that then I'm there. So for me, it wasn't an option to wait. I'm very fortunate, I did have the funds to go privately, and actually at that time it was a little bit cheaper than it tends to be now. So that's why I went down that route. But in terms of when you receive an ADHD diagnosis, that's all you're getting. And I think that's a real struggle for a lot of people when they first receive their diagnosis, is that, okay, so what do I do now? I've been told that I have there's this label attached to these things that I experience, and okay, that's great. And I think some people feel a huge sense of relief. I think some people feel can continue with anxiety. There's some anger there's some frustration, there's some sadness, there's lots of, it can be very, very complicated. And I know for me at that time, it had come at the end of a real struggle with some anxiety and depression. And I remember after my diagnosis, I really struggled, and I went to see, someone had recommended a counsellor that they'd had a good experience with, and I went to see this counsellor. And I'm sure, you know, she is very good, but I remember going to see them and never going back, because in the nicest possible way, and she was very kind, she said, you know, when I explained about my assessment and my diagnosis, she said, it's just a label. It's just a label. And I was so attached to that label at that time, because I'd just got it, you know, after years of feeling like it was a struggle, life was a struggle, to be told, for it to be minimized in that way and say, you know, it's just a label. Well, yes, it is, but...
So this person was an ADHD coach?
No.
Right, okay.
This was a counsellor that someone had recommended to me and had a very good experience with. And I think, you know, that's perhaps one important message to say, that when you're looking for support beyond your diagnosis, go to someone who gets it. You know, if they don't get it, it doesn't mean that they're a bad counsellor or a bad therapist. It just means that they're probably not right for you. There needs to be a real understanding there.
Yeah.
Not just a module in their training.
Which leads me on to the next question around what got you into ADHD coaching.
Right. Well, what got me? Well, so the journey after that was, of course, and I find this with a lot of people who are diagnosed late with ADHD, is that suddenly they hyper-focus on it. They learn, they read, they listen, you know, they watch everything. They find out everything they possibly can, which is exactly what I did. I discovered ADCA in the States and decided that I wanted to train to be a coach. And I first started doing it because I wanted to be able to help my kids. Turns out they are the last people I can help. They don't want to know. and if I try and approach them in anything that is, if they even get a hint of a vague coachy approach, they just absolutely no. They basically walk out the room. So anyway, I realised that they are the last people I could help, but I could help myself. It really, really changed a lot of things for me, for myself, and I can help other people as well. So I do tend to. I like working with adults. You know, I find that really, really rewarding, actually. So yeah, so I did that. And then I went on after that to do some more training. I did some more training with a company called Connections in Mind, which is London-based, and did some specific executive function skills training to support people with their executive functions. And, you know, following on from that, I've done all kinds of things. I've done some introductory courses in TA and somatic experiencing, and, you know, my interest has gone far beyond ADHD.
And that's what I found fascinating with ADHD coaching, that there is different types of coaching training you could do. You mentioned about the executive functioning. I saw on your website or online, it says you're an ADHD Transformation Coach.
Yes.
I don't know what does that mean?
So, God, it sounds a bit naff, doesn't it? Might change that. For me, I think the transformational piece is going deeper than the symptoms. So a lot of people come along and they want, you know, give me strategies. You know, I've got to stop forgetting things. I've got to stop losing my keys. I've got to stop forgetting to pick my kids up from school. You know, whatever it is, whatever people struggle with, I've got to stop overreacting to criticism. Yeah, absolutely. And they are all symptoms. You know, they're all the surface things. So for me, the transformational piece is having the courage to go beyond those things. Yes, have strategies to deal with those day-to-day things, but be prepared to go way beyond that, to the things that happen in the body underneath that start that whole process. And, you know, a lot of people, well, not a lot, you know, some people don't want to go there. You know, that's not a quick fix. But so the transformational piece is about being able to take different actions and a different approach completely when faced with the same struggles and challenges. So you really can transform your response to things.
And just before we went live, we were discussing about some of the things that some of your clients have come up and raised as concerns, and you wanted to highlight a few things. So I'm just going to throw it to you, because I think it'd be quite interesting just to have a discussion around the actual work that you do and what you find in your work with ADHD, and that might be helpful for some people out there that might have not tried or considered coaching. Yeah,
so sorry, just so I can understand, Archie, what you want me to talk about, some of the common things that people come to coaching with? Yeah,
of course. And what is it that you would then do as a coach to kind of get them through those challenges? So if you just give us a couple of examples.
Well, a lot of people come with depression and anxiety, or they will have been diagnosed with depression and anxiety at some point in their life. So there's the kind of fallout of that. And that I kind of take the approach of, okay, are you struggling because you're depressed and anxious, or are you depressed and anxious because you're struggling? And it's usually the second one. Okay, and then that's where the late diagnosis comes in. And so I think the key piece to begin with is giving people knowledge. As soon as they begin to get that knowledge, that basis of knowledge that they can draw on, you can then work with that. Knowledge on its own is not enough. You can work with them. That's right, we're having a disco at the same time. Love technology. So you can work with them so that they can begin to manipulate and use that knowledge so that they can understand it more, because knowledge is not enough on its own. And then you work with them, and this is a process, and it's a process of, you know, practicing it, getting it wrong, practicing, getting it wrong, and it's working with all those kind of things. It's ultimately getting to the place where people realize that they are okay, and that they're not dysfunctional or disordered or, you know, broken or wrong or bad, you know. So it's working with all of that kind of stuff. And I find this particularly with females that I work with, is that they are unable to switch off. I mean, almost their bodies don't know how to do it. And I find, and they quite often show up with, you know, identifying as being perfectionist and high functioning and busy and capable, but stressed, you know. And actually I kind of work from the model of, is it high functioning or is it over functioning? And quite often they begin to realize that actually for a very long time they've been over functioning. You know, so and you're not supposed to. You can't do that forever. And certainly that was my experience as well. I'd over functioned for most of my life.
I was just going to say, because being diagnosed at the age of 49, that's quite a late diagnosis, as we know, and some of the challenges that you faced. What would you say were some of the challenges you faced through your kind of growing up from childhood into adulthood?
Well, I mean, lots, but it's a good question, because some of those challenges are actually what gave me a lot of success also. You know, when I look back at some of the ways that I showed up, you know, I can identify times when I was almost manic. You know, I was so switched on, I was so supremely driven and motivated, and, you know, I never stopped. And that's not healthy. You know, so so what challenged me also gave me a lot of stuff as well. But I mean, if we're going to talk about specific things, going right back to my school reports, it's hilarious, distracting other people, couldn't focus. I was not confrontational, was not disruptive, but I was not focused. And quite often, the dirty word of potential was always thrown around. She has so much potential, but she'll never realise it. So all that kind of stuff. But the other thing was, which I think is a good thing, was just being interested in so many things. I wanted to do everything. And you kind of think, well, that's great, because I had lots of energy, and I was really sporty, and I was really musical, and apparently I was good at schoolwork. Well, I didn't think I was. And, it's like, great, top kid. But I wanted to do everything. And, and even now I can feel myself, I'm still like that, but I manage it. I have to manage it. I now know, because I know I have to go, okay, just because you think that, you feel like you don't need to do it, you don't need to follow it through. But when you don't know what you're dealing with, it's difficult.
It's the self-awareness, isn't it?
Yeah, huge.
We were discussing about creativity, and I know obviously you come from a journey of career in music, successful career, might I add. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about your journey in this kind of music industry?
So I'm a flautist. I'm a flute player.
Yeah.
I actually have a job with the BBC Concert Orchestra, so I'm principal piccolo with them, and I joined them in 2011, I think. Can't remember. Yeah, coming up. Yeah, just 12 years I've been there. And before that, I freelanced as a classical musician. It's what I've always done. So I suppose, would you class that as being creative?
I think, I suppose that anyone that goes into the music industry, there has to be some element of creativity there to be able to just, play an instrument, to, I don't know, just the way you listen to sound, music, make your own I don't know how it works in your in that field, but would you not say so?
Well, I don't know. This is an interesting question. This is another interesting question, because I've struggled with this, because I know that I am a creative person. I can see it so clearly in lots of ways that I approach things. I'm always looking at other ways of looking around the situation, and coming up with ideas of connecting dots, moving dots, creating new dots, whatever. But with music, I've never been able to work it out, because I see music as patterns and systems. I see music in quite a clinical way, and I see it as technical. I have a technical ability. It doesn't mean I don't feel it. I very much feel it, and I very much love music when I'm in it and I'm playing it. But if you asked me if I had my instrument here now and you said, okay, so just go on, play us something, I wouldn't be able to. I would freeze. If you gave me a piece of music, if you gave me dots on a page, I'd play it for you. So I feel, and I know there'd be lots of people who come back at me. We could have a huge conversation about this. I kind of interpret what's on the page, and I sometimes wonder how creative that is. And that's just my personal thing, because I know I've always been very good at technically on my instrument, and I very much see that as patterns. So I don't know. It's a difficult question, but yes, I definitely have a creative brain, and I can't remember who said it, but I remember there was a quote. And it's, what was it? Creativity is impulsivity gone right. So we always think of, it's one of the classic signs of ADHD being impulsive.
Yeah.
And that's usually seen as a negative thing. It's a, you know, that's, you don't want to be impulsive because you don't want to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, take the wrong action. But actually, with creativity, you can't be creative without being impulsive. You know, being impulsive is overriding those executive functions for that split second. It's not inserting the pause between thought and action. It's just going for it. So I think it's why you tend to find a lot of creativity in the area of neurodiversity, not just ADHD.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, and we know there's a lot of successful people out there who have used their ADHD to their advantage, and call it a superpower, or that creative brain.
Yeah, I don't like the superpower thing.
You don't like the superpower?
No,
fair enough.
I do not like the superpower thing.
Whatever you want to call it, but yeah, you can use that to your advantage, and and I suppose we've discussed about ADHD in the workplace and how someone who has that way of thinking compared to in some industries where things have to be done in a systematic way and which in some cases might not really suit the person with ADHD because they like to do things in a kind of roundabout way and still achieving the same goal. So
it's a bit like, and that is something that I really do struggle with is organisation, planning, structure and systems. So for me, that is a real challenge. So if I put myself in a situation in life, whether it was in my job or whatever, where that was required every day, I would really struggle, and I'd probably be very unhappy. Well, I would be very unhappy. It's not my strength. So I can work on that to improve it, and I can also make sure I have my support in place to help me in those areas. It's really important. You can't do everything on your own.
So once you got your diagnosis, you mentioned about the counselling therapy types support you had.
Yeah, one session.
Right, yeah. Was that the only support you had? Was there any discussion around maybe considering trialing medication at all?
Yeah, so I was all in, as soon as I got my diagnosis, I was like, yeah, okay, let's do this thing. So yes, I trialed medication, and medication has worked very well for me. I don't always take it. I take it I say I would take it 80% of the time. If I've got a weekend where I know that I'm doing stuff that I really love, and I've got then I don't take it. I don't need to take it because I'm there already. I love, one of my big things is gardening. I've got an allotment and I love being on my allotment. So if I've got a weekend of being on the allotment, I don't take my medication. I don't need it. Yeah. But most of the time I do take it, and it really helps me. Yeah.
And what's the situation with your kids, treatment-wise, support?
So tricky one. I'm not going to go into specifics here, but so one of my kids was very oppositional, and actually when they received their diagnosis, it was originally ADHD and ODD, and I remember at the time thinking actually the ODD side of things just made so much sense. I know they are separate diagnoses. I now think, is ODD just a part of ADHD? I don't know, maybe you can... I just see it as a part of it.
I suppose going back to what we were discussing about the impulsive element with ADHD, in some individuals, not all, but you can find that the impulsiveness of their ADHD can fuel that defiance in a way, and make them struggle to kind of follow boundaries, and basic things. The word no can be a challenge for them. So and then you have the impulsivity then, which might fuel it. So we tend to see some young people with ADHD presented with some opposition defined traits. So I wouldn't say they're part and parcel, but certainly you tend to come across. There's definitely an overlap there.
Yeah.
Same applies to, and we're going to talk about mental health and comorbidities in a second. So which I suppose, that's the conversation that I want to kind of lead into around kind of autism, mental health. And me and Sophie, I've known Sophie for a while, and the first time we met, the early days, do you remember you came to one of the workshops that I was doing, the parenting workshop?
Yes, that was and that was really early on. That would have been, and that would have, I don't even know whether I would have.
So you hadn't had I think it was for your child, one of your children had just been diagnosed.
Well, we were diagnosed pretty much at the same time. So if Pops had her diagnosis, then I would have done as well. So
right.
Yeah, I can't remember the timeline actually, but that was the first.
So that was definitely pre-lockdown COVID.
Yeah, pre-lockdown.
Yeah. So that's when we started to, we connected then, and we've been in constant contact right through. And then you started to talk to me about your own journey of ADHD, and then obviously the diagnosis, and because you have a combined diagnosis of ADHD and autism.
I do.
And do you want to tell the listeners the first thing that I said when you told me about the autism, particularly the diagnosis?
Well, I can't. This was over lunch.
Yeah. So
what did you say?
And I think I knew about your autism, but I think for me, what was quite apparent, there wasn't anything apparent, even the ADHD, from what I knew of you. Yeah. It's only when I talked to you and you were kind of describing some of your challenges with the systems, organisation, the executive functionings, and I could kind of understand. But I think most people would make assumptions, don't they, usually when you see someone and you think that they're just going to be like literally in your face with their autism or their ADHD.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've had that before where people might kind of go, oh, you don't seem ADHD, or you don't look like you might have autism. Yeah. So particularly as a female.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
God, this is such a big topic.
Yeah.
This could probably be another conversation. And it's a really personal one as well. And I think it's taken me, so I received my autism diagnosis beginning of around February 2021. So it's 2 years ago now. And I really didn't know what to do with it. I really struggled to get my head around it. Because I'd always had this feeling that, having my ADHD diagnosis, it made sense. Yeah, absolutely, I got it. But there was always this other feeling that there was something else, that it just hadn't answered all the questions. And I remember thinking, you can... Oh, I don't know how to describe this. I remember thinking, but I'm like that. Yeah, I'm definitely like that. But then actually, in other areas and in other times, I'm polar opposite to that. I mean, literally, there was nowhere in the middle. And, so this thing about not liking change, for example. Now, with ADHD, we like novelty, we like change, we like, new things, all that kind of stuff. But I knew that in certain areas of my life, I can't bear change. I like everything to be exactly the same every day, in the same way, the same feel, the same touch, the same smell, everything, And I was thinking, well, hey, and then another, lots and lots of other scenarios. And so it really took me quite a while to get my head around it. And I struggled. People think that emotional regulation or emotional dysregulation is having a tantrum, crying all the time, falling on the floor and not being able to cope with the situation. It's not. That's not. It can be so many different things. The emotional dysregulation is why we procrastinate. It's why we put things off. It's because we can't cope with the feelings that we've got inside. So it's not as obvious as people think. So once we can identify what it is, where it's showing up, what it's leading to, and we begin to go, oh, okay, right, okay. And because people think, well, I don't get angry, I don't really shout, so yeah, I don't struggle with emotional regulation, but actually, they avoid. They put things off, they procrastinate, they don't take the step of going for the promotion at work. They stay quiet, and that's emotional regulation, but a quiet form.
Yeah.
A dysregulation, but in a quiet way.
And how that could be misdiagnosed as well as
absolutely.
a mood disorder.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And missed.
Or missed, yeah.
And missed. Going back to my children, we all have a very interesting household. So me and my 2 teenagers all have a diagnosis of ADHD and autism. And I think that there's dyslexia in there as well. And we all present very differently. So one is very compliant, doesn't like breaking the rules, socially quite awkward, and does very well at school. The other is very oppositional, very emotional, very confrontational, not so keen on school stuff. Socially, in a lot of social situations, can be too sociable, can be too outgoing, is too in your face, too, kind of is the one in the middle of the crowd drinking from a wine bottle, and, get totally in there. So 2 really, really different presentations, but the same diagnosis on paper.
So, yeah, and that's interesting because people tend to associate the hyperactive impulsivity part of the ADHD, generally speaking, more in males. And I think this is kind of like a interesting way of viewing ADHD. Traditionally, the females will be seen as the introverts and attentive more the ADD, rather than the males being kind of the extrovert. That's the interesting thing with your children there. You just said like there's differences that is the boy that has the introverted side of his ADHD compared to
probably is much more inattentive.
Right.
But he's also, it's impulsive. I mean, in the sense that. Not rule breaking, but will do really, really stupid things without thinking, that, So, and you just afterwards will go, oh, well, yeah, So, yeah.
Yeah.
But, so, what is the message here? The message is we are all different. There is there are common signs, common symptoms, but for lots of other reasons, we are all different and we all show up very, very differently.
Yeah.
It's not okay. It's not helpful to make assumptions because they quite